become it's become front and center the last couple of years, especially. And I think looking at some data and starting with that and really having a discussion about how it impacts our kids and our families and our communities is really important. Also, just want to mention, aside from being at the health department, I am also a parent, and I've got a little guy in elementary school, and my daughter is in middle school, and she just turned 13 today. So, so I'm now a parent of a teenager. So we'll see how that goes. We're pretty excited about it. So what I'd like to do is just run through some data. I know as soon as I do a screen share, everything's going to change on my screens. I'm not going to be able to see you. So if you do have questions about any of the materials that I run through, please unmute and just ask away, or put something in the chat. And Jeff, maybe if you can monitor the chat box and certainly let us know if there are any questions, that'll be the best way. Normally I'd have 3 screens and I'd be able to see you guys, but had to rabbit through one of my monitor screens. So I'm dealing with a little bit less today, but we'll make sure it works. So let me go ahead and get the PowerPoint all queued up here. All right. Jeff, are you all able to see this?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think what I want to do is really just provide some context. And obviously the last 2 years have been pretty rough in a lot of ways for a lot of folks. And I think this year has certainly continued to have a lot of challenges, and even really just thinking about the last 2 weeks. I think the land acknowledgement is certainly important, and even thinking about the land that we all reside on and the devastation we've had in the last couple of weeks due to flooding, and then the pandemic on top of that, and then hearing about threats to schools, power outages, and so definitely a lot of challenging issues right now. But really, I just kind of want to start pre-pandemic, and I've just got a couple of slides just to create a little bit of background. And we've got a million different slides that we can share. I just wanted to pull out a couple just to really kind of take a look at where we were back in 2018. So this is from Health Use Survey data 2018. And what I did basically is I took 5 different questions that are asked and framed them in terms of a classroom. So if you're a teacher in a classroom of 10th grade students and you've got about 30 students, you would have about 20 that are dealing with anxiety. Now these aren't clinical diagnoses, but these are questions that they ask in the Health Use Survey. 12 dealing with depression, 7 having contemplated suicide, 5 having made a plan about suicide, and 2 having attempted suicide. So I think if you're a teacher or you're in the schools, it just really kind of breaks it down to some of the challenges that teachers are facing and kids are experiencing. So again, this is pre-pandemic back in 2018. And just 2 other slides that I really wanted to share too. That not all situations are equal. And so what we did here, looking at 10th grade students, again in Whatcom County, and looking at depression by ethnicity. So you can see comparisons of our white students, 36% to other BIPOC students. And you can see American Indian, Alaska Native right next to it, all the way up to 66%. So there were certainly disparities before the pandemic, and we'll talk a little bit more about issues during the pandemic. But I think this is an important starting point. And then also similar disparities in looking at contemplation of suicide by sexual orientation. So you can see 13% of students identifying as heterosexual compared to 54% of students that reported to be gay or lesbian, or 60% reporting bisexual. So certainly we're seeing elevated rates of suicidal thinking. Again, these are just a couple of data points that I've correlated, but you could also overlay this with anxiety, depression, things of that nature. So really that's just kind of a look back. I'm going to stop share really Well, I'll mention here that during the pandemic, we did not have access to a lot of the data that we typically would have. So Health Youth Survey 2020 just did not happen. They were not set up to do it virtually. There's a lot of issues with data collection. And so long story short, we went for a pretty long time without a lot of data. This past March, the state actually did implement what they call the COVID student survey. So we can make sure we get these slides out to you later so that you've got the link to the website. And I just put in the bullet points there. You can access the full reports. There's a middle school report and a high school report. Each one of those are about 100 pages. So it's about an inch thick for each of those. A lot of great data, but if you don't have time to really kind of dig deeper, you can also look, there's topic summary reports. One is looking at worries about the impact by COVID-19, mental health and substance use reports, and also school experiences. So I am hopefully going to switch over. Please just be a little patient.
Joe, we have a question by Kelly Alonso.
Yeah.
Curious if there's any data being collected on elementary, at the elementary level.
That has always really been a missing, there's a lot of questions that because of comprehension, a variety of things, they tend not to, there's not a standard tool necessarily that we have that collects this similar type of data. And even between middle school and high school, there are some questions that they word differently because students might not understand. There really isn't a whole lot of value in asking things like substance use, because we tend not to have very much substance use until middle school is kind of when that starts. And then high school, we see that start to trend up. There are other tools that people use, but not on this scale across districts. We don't have this breadth of data. But in individual programs, certainly, you know, they can collect things for younger ages. I think the Hope Science scale, I think goes as young as maybe 8. Does that sound right, Jeff?
Yes, that's true. There's some hope scales that they can use to that are for elementary too. Yeah.
Yeah, a great question. I think that's always been a need too. How can we fill in that data just to see really how kids are, how they're doing? So hopefully you can all see the, Jeff, you want to give me a thumbs up if you can see the website? Okay, perfect. So you can see the link up here. If you come down here, you can, like I said, you can click on the full results for the middle school and the high school reports. And what I wanted to do really was just kind of come down and show you a few examples. But before I do that, I really just kind of want to give you a quick rundown of some of the primary findings that we saw in the COVID student survey. We did see more anxiety and depression. So of those surveyed, this is 58% of high school students and 45% of middle school students reported feeling sad or depressed on most days during the past year. Positive note, we did see a lot of, we can't exactly compare, we should not compare the COVID student survey to Healthy Youth Survey. So I'll refer to it in terms of pre-pandemic rates of substance use were higher than rates that we saw in the COVID student survey. So this survey, I should use the disclaimer that it's a sample of convenience. There may be high-risk students that simply did not take the survey. And we also can't do that straight comparison. So kind of with those caveats, again, we saw substance use numbers quite a bit lower. And what we know from prevention science is availability. If kids aren't, one, accessing substances from their friends, and two, in the younger ages, they tend to use more in peer circles. So if you're isolated, you're at home, those are reasons why those numbers likely went down. A few other kind of major bullet points. We saw less impact of bullying. So we saw decreases in all grades by about 10% roughly. And so some of the data within that we saw you know, sometimes school can be, you know, a tough and challenging place. I think a lot of schools, you know, in the last few weeks have experienced a lot of concerns around bullying and harassment. And for some students, remote schooling provided, you know, a safe place for them to really kind of be protected from some of that. So we'll talk a little bit more, I'm sure, about some of those issues as transitions happen back to school. And I just want to click on a couple of these so that you can see what we're looking at here. So impact of COVID-19. I'm going to scroll, so hopefully I'm not going to make you dizzy or sick by scrolling too much, but just kind of want to get down to the.
Just making sure again.
Yeah, totally. I moved you over there and yeah, so you're all set. And so each.
Okay, so I believe there's about 5 or 6 specific metrics in each of these reports. What you're looking at here, here's the topic category, worried about parents losing jobs. So how many are you worried right now about the following things as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? And that's losing their jobs. The simple thing to do is just look at the total here, the total high school sample, 32%. The great thing about these reports is the state has generated these and broken out by race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status, and by migratory working family status. So you can quickly look and see within the questions that you really care about. And I'm just going to kind of scroll through this and maybe switch over to the mental health one really quickly. This is about concerns, being stressed about affordable rent and housing, 26%, worried about food insecurity, about 17%, loneliness, so closer to 40%. And I think this is where you start to see some of these differences within the student population. So heterosexual students, 31% were reporting, you know, feelings of loneliness. And if they were students that were reporting gay, bisexual, lesbian, or questioning, or something else, quite a bit higher. So these reports are really helpful in looking through this information. Worried about falling behind in school. A lot of students contributed to their stress. So let me switch back. We'll look at mental health and substance use. Prolonged feelings of sadness or hopelessness. So again, I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the questions. Suicidal ideation. Again, you begin to see some disparities within the data. I think this is really important for how we plan within the school, within the community, to really make sure that we're providing students that need more support, the support they need. And hope scores. I think this was a bright spot too, that this is certainly a little bit lower than we've seen in the past, but still for almost 70% of students to report moderate or high levels of hope, I think is a real positive sign. And then adults support. I thought this was another really big bright spot. 8 out of 10 reporting that they've got an adult they can turn to if they need support. So certainly we know there's work to do, you know, to reach out to that other 20%. But again, I think this is really positive. And we don't need to look at the substance use. These were all, like I said, pretty much lower across the board, all pretty positive things. And let's just, and most of you that work in the schools probably, you know, have felt a lot of these numbers. But hopefully for the recording and anybody that might watch this later, I think these are really great tools to be able to look at. School challenges. I'm just going to read the headers here. Learning less than last year, not a surprise. A lot of students felt like they learned less. Learning more than last year. There were a few that felt they learned more. Best effort in school. I thought this was another real positive thing, that almost 7 in 10 kids still tried to do the best they could in school. And again, I think this really just talks about the resilience that was present before the pandemic started. Importance of schoolwork, interest in schoolwork. Again, I know I'm scrolling through these pretty fast, but they're all available. We'll make sure you have the link. Safety from bullying. So when school is online, do you feel safer from bullying than when school is in person? So there were certainly kids identifying as non-heterosexual. Those numbers were actually higher than heterosexual students. Okay, so that is a real, I know it's brief. I'm going to stop share and switch back over. I think one of the things that we've seen, overall from the pandemic is that no one situation was similar for everybody. I think, kids that had access to services, networks, and supports, tended to be more resilient and not as impacted as people that had to worry about, where's my next meal coming from? Where am I going to live? Are my parents going to lose their jobs? So a lot of complexities within this data, but let me try to get back over here. Appreciate your patience as I navigate my
For those of us that are, oh, it's back up. I was just going to say,
please.
felt like this data was representative of what you're seeing.
Okay, and I've lost everybody again. So if you do have questions, please unmute. And so this was one other question that I wanted to really highlight from the COVID student survey. And I think it's just a great example that youth look for and find support in a variety of different ways. So there definitely is a mental health therapist workforce shortage, not only within the state, but within the country. And I think this is just something that really helps. Hopefully you guys are actually seeing the right screen that I'm sharing, but it's the variety of different places. Peers, almost 6 out of 10 report that they turn to their peers. A lot of kids turn to their parents, coaches, religious leaders. So there's a variety of ways that we can really try to find and build up networks of support that youth access. And those that really need more intensive support and therapy, hopefully will have more of a chance with the workforce issues that we do have right now. So I just want to transition into kind of more of a what now, and this is looking at hope science, positive childhood experiences, and protective factors. And I think this is really for those kids that still had higher hope scores. I think these are the things that really made an impact there. And Jeff or Kari, let me know too if we need to speed up or slow down. So the hope science, positive childhood experiences, really everything kind of focuses on those protective factors. And I talked about different areas. In previous meetings, we've talked about the peer domain, the family domain, the school domain, and the community domain. And that really, we need to make sure that students have support in all of those areas. And there's a lot of words on this, and I'm not going to read it to you, but I just want to point out at the very bottom, connection to one healthy adult oftentimes is the one thing that does make a difference. So thinking about those protective factors, and we've shared some of this data before, so I'll go through it kind of quickly. But what you're looking at in between the dotted lines are just a couple of questions within the health use survey that we ask around protective factors. So do you eat dinner with your family? Do you do fun things with your parents? Do you feel safe at school? Could you talk to your neighbor? And so we've correlated those, in this case, with 10th grade students looking at depression. So even if this is a lot to take in, really what it boils down to is kids that report that they eat dinner with their family, they report depression almost half of what kids who report not eating dinner with their family. Could talk to a neighbor. 31% reported depression compared to 58%. So these are kind of, really basic things. They're not necessarily, they're programs or policies or strategies. They're things that everybody can do in their everyday life. Similar type of chart, but looking at contemplation of suicide. So again, having fun with your parents can really be a strong protective factor. Feeling safe at school. Half the rates reporting contemplation of suicide when they feel safe at school. So those are, all things that we want to build up. In addition to certainly, more programming and in other supports that we can provide through our systems. Positive childhood experiences. And I realize I'm going to go through this a little quickly too, but a few things that I want to point out. There is a quote at the top. Studies on positive childhood development and flourishing point out that the absence of negative health is not the same as positive health. So for years, we have understood the impact of adverse childhood experiences, realized the trauma that comes with being physically abused, sexually abused, neglected. And so we've kind of circled the wagons and worked as a community to think about how we eliminate those. And this data actually goes on to say that's great, but it's not enough to prevent everything. What do you want to build in its place? And so these 7 positive childhood experiences really kind of fit within that framework of risk and protective factors as well. This is research from Jeff Linkenbach. And I'm just going to show you quickly what that looks like through their research as well. So individuals with positive childhood experiences, we just showed the 7, which were really about bonding and connections and engagement. 72% had fewer poor mental health days than those with lower positive childhood experiences. In long term, what does this mean? So the next row down, those with 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences, 3.5 times greater reporting of always getting the social emotional support they need as adults. And again, that's not just connecting with professional services, but where people turn to for help, their entire support network is built up and accessed in a different way. And then even those with 0 ACEs. So we think job well done, zero ACEs, but really, you can see only 1/3 reported always getting the social emotional support they needed, which was half of those with 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences. So even if you have 0 ACEs, it's still, if you can fill that cup with that positive things and build those connections and relationships, long-term benefits for mental health and well-being. And then Hope Science. We will likely be going into more of the Hope Science over the course of the year. We may have Dr. Chan Hellman back, but just want to share a few slides related to this. So Hope Science, hope is the single best predictor of well-being. It's measurable, it's teachable. It's actually in the Healthy Youth Survey, and I'm going to share some slides with you. But to let you know that hope is the belief that your future can be better than your past, and you play a role in making it so. I should also mention that hope is really, it's not about a wish. It's about having goals, specific measurable goals, identifying pathways, and also identifying barriers so that you can think of alternative pathways and having the motivation to achieve those. And I think that's why a trusted adult in having connections and relationships with others really makes that difference, because a lot of times we may kind of fall back into despair. And if you've got somebody that you look up to, that you connect with, they can help navigate or provide motivation. And so how does that data look in Whatcom County? Well, when we're looking again, correlating it with depression, for example, this is 8th grade depression. Those with high levels of hope, only 12% were reporting being sad or hopeless, compared to 64% that had reported no or low hope. So it's a range, and I think we all work hard to try and squeeze the balloon to push kids from no low hope down as far as we can. And really even providing slight hope makes a difference. This is another perfect example, impact of hope on marijuana use. So look at that difference from no or low hope all the way to slightly hopeful. Marijuana use rates among 8th grade students drop almost by a third or 2/3. So again, a little hope can make a big difference. You can correlate this data for many things. Also looked at impact of hope on attendance. Now I did change the axes because I wanted to make sure that we looked at highly hopeful and attendance kind of in the same direction. So I know they say not to do that when you're looking at data, but I just want to let you guys know. So we're looking at 36% of kids with no or low hope reported missing school, and 52% did not miss school for any days that reported highly hopeful. So again, if we want to improve attendance, if we want to improve grades, a similar grade right here, mostly reporting A's and B's last year. 36% again with no low hope, all the way up to 86% for highly hopeful. So I think a lot of the work that Blaine Thrives and the members have done has really worked to kind of instill the framework of protective factors, hope science, and it really benefits everything, social, emotional, academic performance, reduces risk for substance use, and a lot of other concerning things simultaneously. So I realize I've covered a lot of material in a short amount of time. But are there questions?
Kari's question was a good one for the group. Is does that sound? How does that match with what you're seeing?
For me or for anybody to.
For anybody.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and start. Originally, when I saw Joe's presentation, it resonated so clear to me that, oh, I want our members to see this presentation because it was specifically what I felt I was seeing on both sides, both the data, pre-pandemic, and then the Healthy Youth Survey COVID data, just in terms of how kids were feeling. But then when he painted it in the light of the hope science or the trusted adults and really saying, okay, this is what we're seeing in our kids. We can't fix this overnight. This isn't something that, one thing will fix, but here is all of these things we know, positive experiences, connection to adults, that hope. And so how do we build upon that? How do we build that in our community? How do we build that in our coalition? How do we build that in our schools? And that's why we wanted to bring this presentation. So what stood out to anyone during all of that?
I had my internet is really choppy, so that's why I have my camera off, but I'm going to try. I think what's on my mind is taking this information and what we know and developing, like Kari, kind of like you were saying, like connected adults or some of those other elements, like make a really actionable next steps for schools to promote some of those things. Like sometimes we have to like systematize it a little bit. Like we're going to do, however, like a strategy basically for connection. I know in the past we've done like the 5 minutes a day for, every day, and like people pick a student. But I'm just thinking about what would be like a system that would allow us to really promote those elements that we know impact this area. So that's a question, not a, yeah.
We had at the middle school, Kari, you remember when we did the, we had picture boards of every student in each grade, and it would go into the staff room and everybody would put a black dot if they knew the kid had, knew them to the point of, X number of contacts or what have you. And then, a red dot or no dot. Wasn't it no dot, Kari? If
I think we would put a red dot if we felt like we knew them and we could say,
okay,
they play basketball, this is how,
right.
or you knew something more about them than just their name. And then a dot if you're like, you've had interaction.
Yeah. And then we would focus on the kids who had few or no dots, and our care team staff would really intentionally connect with these kids, build relationships, and and it was invaluable in the middle school. It's the kids who are invisible finally were seen. So that's one thing that I think is immensely invaluable.
And I think the reason why it worked is because everyone in this coalition, everyone in education, everyone that works with youth, when you see kids that don't have dots, you instinctively want to do something. And so it wasn't an assignment. It wasn't like, okay, you take these kids and you take these kids. It was like, I want, this is my kid, or I have them in my class. I had no idea. And so it worked because there was value and the staff wanted to make those connections. And then we kept the board up all year. I think it ended up in the principal's office. And as those connections were made and those blacks turned to red, then we not eliminated, but you felt like you were reaching that, we weren't letting students fall, between the cracks, because they can very easily, like Kelly said, if there isn't a systematic way to do it. Like everybody wants to do X, Y, and Z, but if you don't put a plan in place, it just doesn't happen. And so this was a very intentional way to connect kids with adults.
I think you kind of answered my question, but so was it something, because we did that in past years at the elementary school as well. And it was kind of like a focus for like, we did it like at one of our PD days or whatever, but am I understanding correctly that you guys had it up all year, that it was something that was like ongoing throughout the year?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it must have been like a late start or a PD where it was launched. And then that day, it was like, hey, please try to come in here and get this done today or tomorrow. And then, I mean, honestly, it probably is still in Darren's office, touch somewhere. And Life Touch gave us, they give you the little stickers so that you can put them on files or whatever. And so we just made a big grid of each grade level, and then put the stickers on, and yeah. And there weren't names to the kids, I want to say, unless, are there names on the sticker?
There were names.
Okay. Yeah. So, but
Kate kept putting it in my office, just for the record.
Well, Cabe has the old elementary ones in his office now, so.
Let's do something with that, Kelly.
Yeah.
but it is, and it would be good to see that kind of data carry, like if they started it at, grade level, then it moves its way up, and you can kind of see those common denominators, like, okay, the same stuff is happening from building to building. What is it, or not, maybe it was just, so I do like the intentionality of it being focused.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
Oh, it's so good to hear this. Just remarkable data, Joe. And I also was thinking with you guys on how we take this objective data and let it filter down into to our adults on campus, our teachers, so that they have this thinking like, how can I put this? This is so important that if there were a way it could be sort of staff-wide in the back of minds of as they deal with their kids. I just, the concern I had is that we could broadcast this better, or it may be done. And I'm thinking of you guys at Middle the last few years, how intentional you've been. But boy, this is so good. How can we, with our very, very, very busy staff, all so tired this year and so challenged, how can this also be a part of serving kids in Blaine schools? So that was I think several of you have just very specifically dealt with that. Julie, Kari, Kelly. But yeah, what a benefit to the students. So that's my question got answered, and I just amplified it a little bit. Thank you.
I love it. We always love hearing from you, Margaret, because you have a lens of years of knowledge that none of us can compete with.
Well, no, that's not true, but thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else have any thoughts before we move on to Kaatri's presentation? Anything from Joe that?
Yeah,
I had one.
I just wanted to mention real quick too, that I think, for a lot of people at the very surface level, underestimate the power that they have on others. And so you saw that list of where you could turn, and for
Yes.
or a teacher or somebody else, you might be that one person and that they turn to. And I think we just need to promote that more and recognize, and with parents too, the power that they have. When they've been surveyed, only about 1 in 5 parents think that what they say or do has an impact on their child's decision about whether or not to use substances, for example. When you ask kids, that number is more like 90% of what their parents say and do matters to them. So bridging that gap so that parents, don't have an attitude, well, nothing I say or do is going to matter, so why make the effort? And it's really just promoting that, yeah, what you do carries a lot of weight, and it is important. So please do that. So it's parents, it's teachers, it's really all of us. And I mentioned the one trusted adult, and I think about Margaret and how many people is she their trusted adult? She's probably got a lot just herself. So I think that just speaks to how the data actually looks in reality in the community. So that was the only other thought I had.
Yes, and we noticed that youth tend to turn to their peers. And so how can we use that data to build up the resiliency in peers to be peer-to-peer mentors, give them the skills when they're, when they recognize that a friend needs help or that a friend has come to them. How do we make sure that those skills are being taught?
That's one of the, that was what I was going to make a comment on, about knowing that they often turn to their peers. One of the elements of the conscious discipline work is there's 5 steps for regulating emotions, but really they're strategies that are really positive for overall mental health, which is, so it's noticing that you're upset, being able to breathe to disengage that stress response, and then naming your emotion, being able to name it, and then choosing a strategy that's going to help you get back to your thinking brain, and then using or knowing what are some of the ways that you can help come back around to the problem that triggered, the upset or emotion within you. That's the general 5 steps. And what we're moving towards is that we teach it to kids, but then kids teach it to each other. And so I'm just thinking about like, if we, as we move forward with the conscious discipline work, would that help with this element of, okay, a friend comes to you, like I'm thinking about middle school and high school and how that transfers throughout the grades. If a friend comes to you, like the first thing is like, help them, do some deep breathing. And we all know that strategy. Ask them how they're feeling. Ask them if they're ready to, work on solving the problem, or if they need a little bit more time, or what they can help with. And then, being able to support their friend through solving, through accessing help or whatever that might be. And so I'm just thinking about when we move that work forward, how do we bring this information into that when we present it to staff to show the importance of it? Because I think sometimes it looks on the surface level like just making that connection of what this looks like long term, I think sometimes doesn't get translated exactly. So that's just something that connects to this work, I think.
And along those same lines, Kelly, I think, conscious discipline is widely used in the K through 5th world, but those kids are learning that verbiage. And it's important for the staff K through 12 as those kiddos move forward, that we can have a common language, that staff can use those same tools that they've learned, that the students have learned. And, I look here with Kellen and the Boys and Girls Club, like how beneficial it would be for them as well to know, hey, this is what they're learning. How can we piggyback? How can we use that also in our programs so that there's a common language and that the kids understand, and that the techniques that they've used to calm or to talk to their peers are the same techniques that are going to be used out in the community, or, like with youth sports, if there's some conflicts on the court, or, like that same, it's very important that all of the adults understand what it is that our students are learning so that it can carry through.
Yeah, and it even translates into adulthood. Like eventually that's a strategy in adulthood. It's like we first need to calm ourselves and recognize if we're ready to initiate whatever interaction to move to a next step or whatever, and then have strategies to solve it. So, but we need everybody to kind of know that information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Agreed. Wonderful discussion. I love it. Well, let's move to Kaatri, because she has some great stuff to share, and then we can kind of wrap it up at the end and continue talking about some of the specific strategies so that we feel like we've done some actionable steps. So we will turn it over to you, Kaatri.
Awesome. Jeff, it's telling me it won't let me share my screen. And I have those 6 slides I wanted to share. Oh, I'm a co-host.
You can do that now.
Just
Sorry.
like that.
Just like that.
Got promoted.
Yep.
All right. Okay, let me see if I'm up for the challenge.
Yep.
All right. Okay, so I'm hoping that you all can see my screen. Thumbs up. Okay, and I can see you, so the technology must be getting better. So I wanted to take a little bit of time and just do my very best to share a local perspective on the data that Joe shared. And I need to just start off with humility by saying that I cannot speak for all of our students. I cannot speak for all of our staff. This is my perspective within my experience during this time. So one of the complex things about the pandemic is health providers are in a pandemic too, and counselors are in a pandemic too, and the teachers are in a pandemic too. So even as we try to do more, we're also living beings within this experience. So I just want to preface it with that. But I do want to try to answer that question from my lens. So I'll start by just saying that the answer to this question is very complex. I'm going to ask you to sit in the tension with me for a few minutes about what's going on in our schools and how we're all doing basically at this moment in time. Joe mentioned, the last 2 weeks, and I was thinking in my mind, we have faced several stressors in our community, in our schools in the last 2 weeks, on top of a global pandemic, right? So people are tired, and there's a weariness and there's a heaviness, and the stressors are compounding. So I just want to acknowledge that this is a challenging time, and we are seeing struggle and difficulty around that. And there are beautiful, hopeful, lovely things happening all over the place. It's like both are true. So this is a hard time. This is a heavy time. There are profound stressors. It's also ugly sweater day at the high school. And I wish I could have walked around and taken pictures for you. This is a student initiated, student driven event. There are 12th grade males and females walking around in giant reindeer sweaters with like noses and like ugly snowflakes and silly, cross stitch patterns on their sweaters because they wanted to do that today. So there are profound levels of this happening. I don't know the shenanigans Kari's been up to at the middle school. Like I think they had a pajama day recently. How do you get middle schoolers to wear pajamas? I don't know, but they did it. Like there are just many, many lighthearted, fun things where people are saying, we have to have some fun right now. We have to loosen up. We want school to feel safe for our kids. So I would say both of those are true. And I think you're going to see that with some of the different things that I talk about right now. So here's some themes in what we're seeing. A lot of this connects with Joe's data so that it's not different or we really don't diverge in Blaine from the data that Joe shared with us. We are seeing a disproportionate impact on our vulnerable students and families. This time has hurt our most vulnerable more than it has those that are not. And vulnerability comes in lots of different layers, lots of different things. I think one thing that has been really clear to me is financial vulnerability has really risen to the top of the concerns or risk factors in my mind. Because whereas before we had people kind of hanging on or making it, or maybe month to month or paycheck to paycheck, they could kind of make that payment at the last minute. There has been a lot of breaking down of those economic supports. So I'm seeing an increased risk with our economically vulnerable students and families. Another theme that we've seen is that our anxiety rates are very high. We're noticing just very high tension levels in our students, in our staff, in our community members. Parents are projecting a lot of anxieties onto staff, which increases staff's anxiety. I mean, there's a lot of bubbling, building tension that people are feeling. And really a lot of the things are higher than they've been before. So we're noticing that with our depression rates, absenteeism is kind of this funny little thing we could look at for a minute. We've talked for years about our attendance rates and trying to raise our attendance rates. We need our kids in school so they can learn. But now students have to self-quarantine when there's an exposure to this virus. And so attendance rates are just a struggle. Of course they are, but that also adds and compounds to the challenge. This is a difficult one. We are noticing our contemplation of suicide is trending younger. And that's very challenging. I'll just speak as a mental health person. As I'm supporting students younger and younger with suicidal ideation, suicidal planning, those types of things, they don't always developmentally have the skills or the developmental awareness to even work through that and safety plan and talk through it. So there's a real pressure around that. That's a risk factor that we're noticing and we're very concerned about. We're noticing our 5th to 9th graders that when I look at my caseload, my 5th through 9th graders are at the top of my concerns list right now. And I think I would project that this is going to come out more and more. Something about how this age group has been impacted over the last few years. All of us had our developmental process interrupted by the pandemic, even as adults. Whatever it was we were supposed to be doing in our life phase and growing and developing, it got interrupted. Like the pandemic put us in isolation, and then we put these masks on our faces, and then like we had to stay home for safety, but that really wasn't good for us socially. And there were just all of these complicated things happening for every person in my perspective. There's something interesting about the middle school age group, that 5th through 9th grade, being home for a period of time and then now being back. From my perspective, they are giving it to us. They're acting out quite a bit in this age range. And there's a lot of externalizing that's happening from them having their process interrupted at the time that it was, or whatever it has been for each of them. So another thing that we're seeing, there's a pretty big strain on our systems right now. So society systems are impacted, our teachers are impacted, our mental health system is impacted, our primary care is impacted. I mean, there are just, all these systems are kind of carrying more, and the need is getting bigger, while resources in some ways are feeling stretched thin. And so we're noticing that it's like our students' needs are increasing and we're having to try to multiply resources. And I would say I personally feel very supported by the community, by the district, by the administrators. I mean, everybody's treading underwater as fast as they can, pedaling as fast as they can to come up with more options, more funding, more services, more supports. It's just this fine balance of kind of putting those pieces in place as we're going through the crisis, right? So it's like, it's a moving target. There's a lot of things that are happening, but it's also, the problems are also complex. And then the last thing that I would point out is just that there's been a dramatic increase in our need for mental health services, and also our conversations about health, wellness, wholeness, mental health, how we're all doing. There was a COVID student survey that Joe referenced. And one of the data points that I thought was really interesting is 40% of Washington youth who responded in our state said that they were having more conversations about mental health. And from my lens, that's a really positive data point. The more we talk about it, the better it gets. Like my whole work, my whole calling is say the hard stuff out loud. Like if we can just say it, then we're not alone with it and it's not festering inside of us. So I think that these increased conversations and the increased need for services is a challenge. It's also an opportunity. Like what if our society broke through on some things during this time? What if we face some hard things and do the deep work in ourselves and in each other and around us and in our family? What if we worked on some things and some things got better? Like, I do feel like there's some hope and potential in all of that. So let's go on to the next one. And I just wanted to share kind of a quote that is comforting to me. This is from Ann Maston, and she says, "Resilience does not come from rare, special, or extraordinary qualities or processes. Resilience develops from the everyday magic of ordinary resources." And if I could define or pinpoint what is working in our schools right now, it's people pulling on what they already know, right? Like there are so many good things happening, and it's kind of back to the basics. Like, you know, I think everybody's like, oh, mental health crisis and oh, behaviors and oh, yes, like, yes, all of those things are true. And we have resources, we have things that we know are effective, we have things that we know work. And I just see a collective pulling together around those resources and around creatively problem solving individual cases where we need to. So that's my first point. That's when I think about what are we doing? How are we as a school system approaching all of this right now? And again, this is my perspective, but I think we're working really hard to remind ourselves what we already know. When I think about things that we already know, we know that a trusted adult is a phenomenal resource. It is a phenomenal resiliency factor, even in the midst of some devastating risk factors, right? We know that very difficult things happen in some of our children's lives, and that is devastating and it's heartbreaking. And we also know we can do what we can do, and we can help kids. We can create safety for them. We can intervene as needed. We can be trusted adults for the kids in our perimeter and in our lives. We know that breath refreshes the nervous system, right? I mean, I feel like breathing comes up every day in our school system right now, but we have to remind ourselves I can take a breath. And I've told students many times, this is one thing you can carry with you always. You have to breathe anyways. Like, what if we did it in a way that disengages your fight and flight or disengages your shutdown response? That is within your power to do. I'm also helping and trying to remind people that fresh air and time outside is one of the biggest gifts we have in our region. We are so lucky for the beauty that surrounds us when we step outside. Even when it's dark and even when it's cold, we can remember to kind of get fresh air and get outside, and there's great mental health benefits. So these are just a couple examples of really basic things that I'm reminding my students every day and staff that I get to talk with. Another thing that I would say is that we're just building on the systems that were already in place. And I just need to say, I'm really thankful for the groundwork that had been laid in our district before we ever heard the word coronavirus. Like, SEL was happening before COVID-19. We created mental health, like a mental health district position in a county that really hasn't done that 5 years ago. We partnered with the health department to do that work. So when I think about, and these are only a few examples that directly affect me, but we have really put some good building blocks in place before this stressor came our way and kind of knocked all of us back a little bit. And so one of the things I see us doing during this time is working, like I said, to try to multiply those resources and reframe and reassess as often as we need to how to use the things we have in place in a way that's sustainable. Another thing that I think we're doing is we're trying to normalize the struggles of this time. We've encouraged our teachers to say, you know, that was hard for me too. How was it for you when that happened the other day? I got stressed. I felt nervous. How did you feel? And our teachers are taking it on, like they're modeling, they're talking about things, they're helping demonstrate for kids how to problem solve through challenges, how to face your nervous system being overtaken by an outside stressor. I mean, we're really working to equip them, and then also they're equipping the students around them too. We're trying to have fun. We're trying to find moments for fun. I listed a couple examples earlier, but there is shenanigans all over the place. Like, we have like videos that come out. There was like a bake-off between the high schoolers. I mean, there was a difficult staff meeting the other day, and one of the staff, the home ec teacher in that situation, sent out an email, come get cookies. I've got cookies. Who needs a cookie? I mean, it's just little things, but it's like, what can we do to just kind of take care of each other, back to the basics, have fun together. I think people are working hard on those things too. And then the last thing is we are just reminding staff on a regular basis, there is a world of support for you. Education is identified as a high risk category right now, and I fully agree with that. The stress levels are high, and we are constantly reminding people we have an employee assistance program. You can get temporary counseling through that program at any time. Through your health insurance, you should be able to get longer term counseling. Let us know if you need help with that. Here are the resources. We're just really trying to encourage people to seek the support that they need. No matter what that looks like for them. I have a thought I kind of want to share as we're closing, but I was talking with a colleague yesterday who I just really, really respect and I really appreciate. And we were talking about the impact on schools, the impact on therapists, and just this pressure that people are trying to kind of get out from under right now and feeling a heaviness as we enter the winter time. And she made the statement that therapists are going to need to get comfortable not always knowing what to do. And I'll just say, as a therapist, that's not a comfortable place to be in, because you're supposed to know, right? Like, it's your job. People came for a reason. And so she was saying that we're going to have to grow our capacity to not have the answer, but to hold people anyway. There are some problems in society right now that are a little too big. There are some things going on that are just a little too heavy, and they're not quite solvable in the moment all the time. And I was thinking, this analogy feels like our schools to me right now. Schools are a microcosm of society. And I think we're kind of holding things. We're holding our kids. We're trying to hold this together. And it's a much bigger picture than us. We're a piece of it. But society has some things to figure out. Like, the adults in society are working hard. And I do believe there are good things happening and good efforts and good progress. But society is going to need to really work with our schools to help us figure out these pieces. I wanted to share this picture because this is the emperor penguins in Antarctica. When it gets way too cold for the babies, they all do this kind of huddle thing. And I just like this analogy. I feel like right now we're huddling, right? We're kind of coming around our kids. We're like, what do they need? How can we support them? And how can we systematize some of this? What are some systems? How is this pushing on our systems and showing us areas we need to grow? Some things are kind of cracking open, and we're looking hard at that and trying to figure out what do we do to keep these kids safe, to wrap the supports around them that they need, and in a way that's sustainable. And there are people all over asking those questions. People much smarter than me are having much bigger conversations about this, and I do trust that process. And I feel like there's good work happening in the midst of some challenge. So that's kind of my summary of things that can't really be summarized. So, and Jeff, how do I can unshare so that we can have our group back?
Yep.
Kaatri, thank you always for your words and your vision of what you see going on, and you articulated both the positive and some of the negative that we do have to sit in, because we can't acknowledge it. We can't solve or attempt to solve if we don't acknowledge that it isn't perfect right now. So thank you.
That's a beautiful perspective. I love your hope. One of the things that I hear, Kaatri, a lot is people say, oh, everybody's overwhelmed, we can't do any more. And it's like, well, actually, it's not an extra job. It's that we focus on what we need now the most. And everybody's capable of saying a kind word, which is all it takes. This is the time when not having the answer and huddling and asking somebody to take a deep breath and trusting that they'll figure out their own resilience, that their resilience is within them, and being a witness and a believer in them. So it's beautiful, Kaatri. I feel more hopeful when you and Joe speak about this.
I feel hopeful. Kelly must have had to pop off, but I think one of the benefits of this coalition is it reminds you that we do not do this work alone, and that we don't have to have the answers, and that we don't have to fix it by tomorrow. And so that in and of itself is the gift, I think, of Thrives, and of all of those of us that are here today and those of us that couldn't be here, just carrying that work together and saying, how can I make this burden lighter for anyone. And so I like that Kelly did say we need some actionable steps. I don't know what those are today, but I'm sure that we will work on some actionable steps to kind of unpack some of this data, and then look at this new year with hope and vision to more intentionally connect our students with trusted adults, both within our schools, within our community. Just a lot of amazing things that go on within the little township of Blaine and Birch Bay, and even our little Point Roberts square up there. So
I'm curious, Kellen, how this all relates to the work you're doing with the Boys and Girls Club.
That's a really good question. So we do focus a lot on the SEL. We do SEL activities almost every day, when we have the time to, at least. And all of our programs, I make them to focus on specific aspects, teamwork or inclusion, safety, that kind of stuff. And so it's something that's always on my mind, for sure. And I always try to get my 2 staff members in on that as well, so that we're always on the same page.
Thanks.
Yeah, the Boys and Girls Club is a gift to our community, as well as the Parks and Rec. They weren't able to make it today, but just so many organizations that they're doing the work that our youth need, and rebuilding those connections, and having places for them to go and to hang out, and to learn from other adults. Joe's putting some resources in the chat. Oh, dinner conversations, yes. I know Kate is not here today either, Kate Foster, but she is an advocate of the Strengthening Families program. And I know that right now they're in the midst of an online series, and we have a couple of our Blaine families that are utilizing that. And it's the same, they talk a lot about those protective factors that Joe gave, just learning the skills of having conversations with your kids and building those routines and traditions, and that center around dinner or car drives, or just the simple things that we can do as adults to make those connections with our youth.
I have a plug for Strengthening Families. I wish Kate was here because I wanted her to hear it too, but I had a student and family that I referred, just really high risk level. I was very concerned. There's concern there, but the mom called me and she said, we went and it was actually fun. Like I think we had a good time with our middle schooler. And I was like, oh, thank goodness for systems that wrap around, because we can't do this all by ourselves. Oh, and they've repeatedly just said, it's fun. And the kid's telling me, I'm having fun. I actually really like it, which is just awesome. They've really got a good program. Yeah. So.
They do. And some amazing facilitators. And Kate does a really good job of reaching out and doing it in a virtual setting. We've done it here in the school district on campus, and we provide a meal. And I think that they have tried to mimic that same sort of thing by delivering gift cards for dinner or something, so that there still is that chance to gather over food. Because I think that is the one thing that we as Americans have in common, is that we problem solve over food. Like, things get done when we're eating and there's good food and connections. And so I'm glad that Kate found a way to have that element still in there, because that family dinner piece, or just, breaking bread with one another. So we have about 9 minutes. Any last thoughts, Jeff?
Well, one thought is, besides this is I love the hope in this group and the excitement about what's possible. And I want to say is, if you have any ideas, one of the things that I'm loving about the recording is anything you said, which is we ought to do this, Kari and I can keep track of that. So any suggestions for system or programmatic mindset thinking, we'll put this together and come up with it. But if you have any ideas about, there ought to be or we should do this, feel free to put it in the chat now, or say it now, or email us, and we'll look at that as the beginnings of some possibly looking at what strategies and things are doable and taking them in pieces. This is part of a bigger. Joe and I are part of the Healthy Whatcom group that's doing some planning with the health department and Peace Health and the Chuckanut Health Foundation around mental health, mental wellness in the county, and looking at what structures could be in place to make it just a way that we breathe as a community, of thinking of mental well-being for youth and each other. That what would make it easy to make that, like Kelly was saying, with if we can just breathe, then you can start to think about what you're going to do, and trusting that people will solve their own problems. They don't need. We're so used to, at least as a white male, middle class male in our society, I always thought it was my job to tell people how to fix things. Like everybody came to me with let me tell you what you should do. But to trust that people come to it themselves, that they know within them, is a way to look at a community and parents and children and believe in each other, believe in each other's gifts, strengths, capacity. Anyway, that's my my 2 cents. But I just want to say is if you have ideas, Kari and I's job is to distill some of that into what are actionable things. And many of you have said things that look simple and actionable and are not extra work, are just a reframing of the work.
Absolutely. And Jeff will work on splicing the presentation together so that, we can, I know I had invited the school counselors, and it's a hard time. 12 to 1:30 is a hard time. They're in the midst of lunch bunches and groups and all of that sort of fun stuff. But I think Margaret, hinted when she was discussing that this is information that they all need. And it, if it's something that they can take 30 or 45 minutes out of their day and watch a recap and just kind of have that shared, knowledge and that there are a group of people looking at some of the struggles that they see and that it's not falling on, deaf ears, and that, sometimes that's all you need is you just need to know that someone's seeing it, someone's listening, and that, there are things being done to kind of help them. I do want to send out the link I sent to Kaatri. There is a webinar series coming up that's put on through Kaiser Foundation, and it's a wellness seminar. I believe, if one of you have the link that you could put it in, I believe they start in January. They're 1-hour webinars from 4 to 5 for adults to kind of really give them, the adults, the tools that they need to refresh. And I think that is necessary when we look at this new year and we set goals for ourselves. It's very important that we take time for us, because we can't pour from an empty cup. And this, it's free, and educators, it offers clock hours. So we love that, because anytime we can get free clock hours and help ourselves is a win. So that's Jeff, maybe we can send that out in the recap when we send it out, the link for that. And it's not a one-time, I think it's a series, or they'll have them every month. But I think that that's a resource that could benefit a lot of the adults in our community right now. So.
Any other thoughts that people want to share to the?
For the good of the order?
Yeah. The good of the wellness.
I'll say I have a wellness note for all of you, or just a little tip. Sometimes when the world is heavy or anything is hard or heavy, we think like, I've got to work this out. I got to sit with this. I got to, and there's been some heavy things we've talked about today. And one of the things we just talk about in the schools is mindfulness and presence. Like, deeply savor joy over the next couple weeks. Mm-hmm. So yeah, whatever that looks like for you, like take a break, take the break, take time, because challenges are not going away. They'll be here the moment you come back to your job or to your this or to your that, or there are hard things that we're all gonna, face and work on together. And so when I think about this team, we're just a team of feelers and carers and people who are doing hard, heavy work in our personal lives, with our communities, in our profession, whatever it is for people here. So just savor any rest that you have coming up in this next couple of weeks, like lean into that. There's nothing selfish about that. So that's my tip that I'm going to try to follow too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Oh, Charles has been with us.
Just for Kaatri's. Yeah, and Kaatri, that was wonderful to hear. Trust and hope, and people are doing things. It all comes together. So many people working. Not any one of us can do it, but together, so much can be done. So thank you all for the commitment that we're seeing.
So encouraging. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Marvin K. Mooney, goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
Have a great, I'll be thinking of you as one of the things I'm grateful for. I just want to say is this, you're right, this team is,
thanks.
Yay.
Yay. Thank you.
Good folks. All right. Thanks again, you guys.